Welcome to the Social Science and Science and Technology Studies and Philosophy mini conference. The way that we're going to set up today is that each of our presenters is going to have 3 minutes to give you a lightning version of the stuff they've been working on for the entire past year. In order to facilitate conversation and to allow everyone to have time to present, we ask that you type your questions into the chat as the presentation is happening. And then after our presenters go, they'll be sure to get back to your questions in the chat and give you the answers. Each one of our presenters is going to have 3 minutes and they'll be sharing their own screen. The first presenter that we have is Lena Evans. Lena, can you try to share your screen or see if I need to give you an additional allowance?
Sure thing. I can share. So how is that looking for everybody?
That looks
Alrighty.
I'll start your 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
All right, go off. Well, that was a weird way to put it. Hi, everyone. I'm Lena, and today I'll be talking about the 2020 election during COVID-19. Okay, incumbent Republican President Donald Trump and 6 incumbent Republicans stood in the 2020 elections as a testament to their ability to minimize the inflicted damage on their constituents and provide relief during a universally difficult time. Executives of the US government maintain the highest levels of control over the health departments of their constituents and have the greatest likelihood to face responsibility for these policies. Literature suggests voters are targeted and punitive, acting as rational gods of vengeance and reward. They reflect on incumbents' reactions to disaster and assign levels of responsibility to different government officials. Natural disasters like the pandemic pose a unique opportunity for incumbent leaders seeking re-election to prove their competence in managing governmental disaster relief and avoid punishment from the electorate. This study explores the relationship between US counties with increased rates of COVID-19 infections and deaths and the 2020 presidential election and gubernatorial elections in which 6 states in which Republican incumbent governors seek election. These are my hypotheses that I'll be exploring about turnout and responsibility. For this project, I made my own original data set of these 6 states' counties for a total of 444 data points. The independent variables I used to control for other factors of the election are the demographics of the counties and ease of access to voting, usually by the state level. Sometimes I could get county-specific data. 2016 turnout and results are used as a control variable. Due to the complexity of elections, I did an exploratory analysis method so data points could be assessed in different ways. This is the regression analysis used in my final paper. And the only data point I want to explain here is for an easy comparison of the unemployment rate. You can see that turnout is extremely negatively affected by unemployment rate, which is expected because it usually depresses turnout. But over here, you can see that Republican incumbent governors actually fared much better in places with higher unemployment rates. This is an anomalous finding because, as I said, turnout is typically depressed by unemployment rate, and it usually negatively impacts Republicans. So this tells us that governors likely did something to satisfy their constituents within the realm of unemployment, enough to avoid punishment. This is a dot and whisker plot displaying what I just showed you, but specifically for infection rates. The dots stand for coefficient estimate, and the whiskers represent the confidence interval. If the whisker crosses 0, it's not relevant to the study. The most important data point from this is that you can see infections are found to be held, or both politicians are found to be held accountable to infections, but governors specifically actually get punished more for infection rates. This is the death rates. You can see here that Trump is extremely severely punished with a coefficient estimate of -20, but governors are not punished as their results are not relevant. They cross the 0 line. So, to wrap it all up, the answers to my hypothesis are that actually turnout remained unchanged, which I didn't expect to see. Republican incumbents were punished for the county's increased COVID-19 severity, like I expected, and the incumbent president was punished for different factors than the governors, which I also expected. This tells us that democracy is doing well under the watchful eye of the exact and punitive voters. Thank you everyone so much for your time. I'll be answering questions in the comments, or you can direct them to my email, and you can find all of my data on my GitHub in the link, which I will post in the chat now. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Lena. It's so interesting, and you did it so well. It was a huge data enterprise for you to get everything collected in such a fast time, and I'm happy that you did. Our next presenter is Samantha Winter. Samantha, can you share your screen?
Yes, I can. I'm gonna present. Good. Okay. Hello, my name is Samantha Winter, and in fulfillment of my BA and my thesis advisor, Samantha Muka, and investigating pandemic COVID-19 pandemic. So what we aimed to get at was how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted women's overall experiences being pregnant. And we were inspired to take a look at this topic because we noticed that much of the literature regarding the intersection of COVID-19 and pregnancy involved medical implications for pre and postpartum women, such as rates of transmissibility between infants and their mothers, or vice versa. But little had been done to center the experience of the pregnancy itself to understand the human impact of epidemics on this community, whether that be financially, whether that be socially, and so on. And so in order to conduct our research, we created a 22-question survey hosted on a platform called Qualtrics in order to gather data pertaining to women's experiences being pregnant during this pandemic. And we got at factors such as their spending habits, different safety and health protocol that was present in the delivery room, and also overall difficulties that women felt as though they had experienced throughout their pregnancy. And we had a fairly robust sample size of 363 pregnant women over the age of 18 who were pregnant after January 1st, 2020, so as to ensure that they were pregnant actually during the pandemic. And we employed a quantitative and qualitative research approach, asking both multiple choice and open-ended research questions that allowed for a holistic look at the factors that made their pandemic pregnancies especially unique, distinct, and, as we found, unfortunately difficult. So according to our research, women who gave birth during the pandemic were experiencing higher rates of anxiety than they did, A, both before the pandemic occurred, and B, during their last pregnancy if they had been pregnant before. It's common knowledge at this point that the pandemic has exacerbated a pre-existing mental health crisis for many individuals and communities across the globe. But one particularly impacted community that is often overlooked includes pregnant women. In our survey, we asked, on a scale of 0 to 10, how anxious would you say you are when not pregnant? And the majority of respondents chose the number 6 on the scale, which is already high. But when we asked them in the next question, how anxious would they say they had been while pregnant during the pandemic, a majority of respondents chose the number 7 on the scale. And this 3.67% increase in anxiety indicates that women have been experiencing higher levels of anxiety during their pandemic pregnancies than they normally did when they weren't pregnant before the pandemic or during their last pregnancy. And we found that this was due to 3 distinct factors. The first was a disruption of routine prenatal and delivery procedures. Many women thought is that, going into their pregnancy, they would have a midwife or a loved one at their OB appointment or in the delivery room, but this wasn't so due to health and safety protocol at many hospitals. Also, there was factoring in loneliness and social isolation that many women felt, not being able to hang out with other pregnant women or be with their loved ones. My goodness, excuse me. And lastly was a fear of the unknown. There was so much misinformation and lack of knowledge at the beginning of this pandemic in particular that made it really difficult. So sorry. For many women to feel confident and okay with where their pregnancies were at. And many were concerned about the state of health for their newborn. So perhaps the most powerful aspect of our research that helped us understand the negative impacts of the pandemic have been women's own words, or qualitative research. You'll see here a couple comments that we received from women. The first woman explains how the most difficult experience of her life was learning that her baby passed away at her 12-week appointment, and she was alone and her partner couldn't be there to hear the heartbeat, which was devastating. And the second woman here felt like she missed so much of her pregnancy sitting around at home and not being able to partake in traditional pregnancy measures. So we hope that research such as ours will be able to better inform medical professionals in the near future, especially as they begin to gain a better understanding of the impact of the pandemic on mental health and birth outcomes in general. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Oh, so good. So if you have questions for Sam, put them in the chat. And our next presenter is going to be Dylan Moon. Dylan, are you here and can you share your screen?
I am here and I can, hopefully.
Thank you. Very good.
Alrighty, hello everybody. Let's get this going. I always have difficulty, like, sharing my screen always messes things up, but hopefully this works. Alright, can you see my my presentation? Yes. Alright, my thesis basically centered around the role that nuclear power can play in alleviating the absolutely devastating energy shortages that sub-Saharan Africa is facing more so than any other region in the world. And this is especially pressing given climate change and the fact that this region is far more vulnerable than elsewhere, and also without reliable access to electricity, it's less able to adapt to coming extreme weather events. Oh. Can I navigate through the slides? Can you still see? Okay, sorry. All right, so this is the Director General of the IAEA making a quote about nuclear power in Africa. You can see, you can read it for yourself. A third of all the countries nuclear in Africa, and their main reason is reliability, and I agree with him on that. Here's a non-extensive list of all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa pursuing nuclear power. These are the ones that have established regulatory bodies and everything. Here's just a quick video I wanted to share. This is Kenya's Nuclear Power Agency doing a YouTube dance challenge, and I think we have to bring the same energy to the US with our NRC. Anyways, I've highlighted here the 3 countries that seem most ready to get nuclear power in the near term. This is Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria. This has to do with the state of their regulatory frameworks and also their interactions with vendor countries. So the main questions I wanted to ask, this is definitely an overview type thesis, but I wanted to see how nuclear power is going to specifically benefit the region and what are the best ways to go about this. So this involved asking technical questions, such as what designs should they pursue, who should they buy it from, and how are they best going to pay for it. It also included more on-the-ground questions like how will nuclear power interact with the specific business models of utilities, which are the ones responsible for providing power. I basically went about this by interviewing experts, reading a whole bunch about nuclear power and also energy issues in sub-Saharan Africa, and then I drew on case studies from countries that are currently building their first nuclear power plants to kind of extract wisdom. My conclusions are numerous, I would say, but just because there's so much to talk about. But one of the main conclusions I found from studying the electric utilities in these areas is that they need reliable power, not only because industrial customers need it to operate their machinery and whatever, but the business models of utilities rely on being able to keep people on the grid without having them defect to things like backup diesel generation. And also, nuclear power is an ideal fit for this type of reform because it offers a level of fuel supply security and basically reliable generation that things like solar and wind and hydro don't. So while these other sources are also low carbon, they don't fit as well in an electric reform that emphasizes industrial users, which is of course central to broader economic growth. I also determined that small reactors, as opposed to the large ones that you see in the United States, are going to be the way to go. This has to do with reduced capital costs and also the size on the grid, which has a certain underdeveloped capacity in these countries. Similar research to mine emphasizes that advanced small modular reactors, which will be available in the next 10 years, are the way to go. But actually, from the case studies, I found that small modular reactors are a common way for developing countries to get nuclear power, and the lowest risk, best options could be existing reactors, not advanced reactors that are yet unproven. I also found that the whole scene is basically limited by the fact that Russia and China are the only 2 vendors really to heavily market their reactors in the region, and this comes with a host of political and geopolitical considerations that have to be taken into account. Overall, nuclear power is definitely a good option, but there's a lot to take into account here. This is my contact if you want to reach me, dmoon1@Stevens. I also want to give a huge thank you to my advisor, Professor Wellerstein, and also Dr. Victor Lawrence and Dr. Ed Friedman, who met with me just as much as my advisor did and were absolutely integral in providing feedback and guidance to this project. Thank you.
Thank you. JC Hanley, you are next. Can I see you and can you share your screen?
Yes, ma'am. See if we can do that. You guys seeing that? Cool. All right. Hey, everybody. My name is JC Hanley. I'm a senior. I am in fulfillment of my requirement for my BA in philosophy and advised by Dr. Michael Steinman. I took time this my senior year to do a thesis on abortion in America and detail new moral considerations, specifically ontologically speaking. Acorns, evaluating an underlying assumption from a past famous author on abortion, pre-Roe v. Wade, 1971. The term legal permissibility doesn't give it justice, but more the permissibility of prohibitive legislation in the entire, mainly in America, but in general, I think as well, you could purport. The primary sources for my presentation include mainly Philippa Foote and Judith Jarvis Thompson, primarily Judith Jarvis Thompson and her essay in defense of abortion from 1971. Most of my statistical and quantitative research and statistics come from the Guttmacher Institute, mainly a 2017 study, because they haven't been able to, it doesn't sound like anything from 2018, 2019, at least individual yearly statistics, unfortunately, not in one broad swoop. Regarding the actual points of the paper, what I'm actually attempting to prove, I'm similar to Dylan in the sense that, you know, a philosophy major, it's kind of extremely broad. It's an enormous topic. I can no way get into proper, appropriate detail on all of this. And at the same time, yet there's so much to say. There's something to say in every part of this for everybody, probably too. Yet we say nothing, you know, out of fear in a sense as well. But the main three things I hope to prove, or the main three concepts, was one, in the green, moral considerations concerning abortion, ontologically speaking, and practically, maybe and are appropriately varied. I say maybe really to give myself leash. They are appropriately varied. They are. The second is that the regulatory debate, being that it impacts half of America, if not more, automatically more women, or is more men. There are more women in America than men. I apologize. And basically, just in that this reasoning or justification is not enough to pass legislation anywhere. But ultimately, again, the act to legislate with the express intent to inhibit or prohibit medically provided not yet viable abortions or non-viable abortions is a transgression upon women and pregnant persons' civil rights, is based in and upon inappropriate socio-legal considerations, and does not align in accordance with traditional American libertarian legislative values. Now, I know this is incredibly touchy, incredibly difficult to discuss in general, and I can't obviously get into like more in the actual arguments that, you know, in themselves are incredibly detailed, incredibly scrupulous, I guess the word would be, but I can get into two figures concerning specifically 1/3 of the argument, the moral ontology. This is the part that, at least philosophically speaking, is the most, you know, takes the most work. But these two charts below, considering the moral ontology of procreation of an oak and a human, evaluate an underlying assumption in, it's a game theory matrix, I apologize, I should have explained that, but they evaluate an underlying assumption in Judith Jarvis Thompson's 1971 defense of abortion. She made an underlying assumption that basically purports that a newly fertilized ovum, a newly implanted clump of cells, is no more a person than an acorn is an oak tree. And I felt that that is not so much an enormous leap, it is a leap, and I just thought it really needed a great deal amount of evaluation, further consideration, even with the strength and you know, I guess persuasiveness of her latter argument. Now, in consideration of these two charts specifically, important notes to consider is that one, this is obviously an evaluation of her assertion, like this is to evaluate that. Two, figure 1.1 examines the oak. It examines a human consideration, our consideration of an oak. It's just us looking at an oak and looking at an acorn, and as well as we can, and saying that's what it's worth in different situations based upon the way we view existence, such as definitionally versus essentially, as in definitionally valuing ourselves as, or definitionally existing as, I am JC Hanley and nothing more. I am 21 years old. I am this. I am very structured. I'm only this, solely this. We're essentially saying, I am essentially Stardust. I am also Stardust. That is to say, in certain contexts, you should be definitionally, it makes more sense to be definitionally existent versus essentially, such as law. We don't try anybody in a court of law as stardust. And then regarding value, it really, looks into how you value other life, whether you believe it's most fair to value all life practically, or whether you believe it's best to value life intrinsically first and then move to practical means utilitarianistically, etc. But specifically as well, highlighted below in number 4, the question also considers technically what the appropriate difference ought to be between the way we define ontologically an acorn versus an oak tree, which is a biological organism definitionally, versus a human to human definition. It shows us exactly a level of speciesism that we carry, and we have to essentially grapple with that. We're forced to. That is to say that there's no formally agreeable judgment of correctness in the theoretical principle contained in these figures. There is no right answer. They're made to be vague. That is the point in which they're varied.
This is really showing the difference between social scientists, STS people, and philosophers, where I know JC could go on and tell us more and more. But in the interest of time, we have 2 more people to get to. And so Eli, your 3 minutes are going to start whenever you're ready.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna just share my screen. Cool, can everyone see this? So my name's Eli, and my STS project is called Identity as a Disorder, Investigation into Physician Bias and Trans Health. So we know that doctors play a substantial role in the process of medical gender transition, which is often requisite for being able to legally transition within the United States. And trans-affirming care is also important in the social components of gender transition. And there are well-researched disparities in quality of life for trans individuals in the United States. And that kind of extends into media representation, healthcare access and quality of care, and public policy. And the historical pathologization of gender nonconformity is one of the major causal mechanisms that has produced and reproduced these disparities. And as this identity has become medicalized, there has been a system established in which trans individuals really have to rely on a system of medical care to access affirming therapies. But the issue is that medicine hasn't really yet reckoned with the political or cultural implications of such a system. And this is a problem because the healthcare system places hurdles in the way of patients due to a lack of provider education and a lack of consideration for the needs of transgender people on the part of larger medical institutions of both learning and practice. And my research studies provider bias and specifically views on trans issues held by physicians. And this line of research is important because the average time spent learning about LGBT issues in medical school is less than 3 hours over the course of 4 years, leaving practitioners to rely on popular knowledge on how to treat their trans patients, which, as you can imagine, may lead to worse outcomes. So my study was interested in determining whether knowledge of trans status affects the way clinicians approach diagnosis and how components like education, ethical beliefs, and general attitudes towards trans individuals intersect with their behavior. So to examine what this looks like in practice, I posed the question, do physicians show bias when treating trans patients? So to delve into the subject, the 3 disciplines that were really helpful to pursuing this question in the context of the past, present, and future were history, STS, and psychology. And history helped provide the landscape of understanding how gender dysphoria evolved to become a diagnosis and how contemporary standards of diagnostics and treatment have developed and why they look the way that they do. STS also helped me examine what that means in the larger context of kind of medicine and society, and how the restriction of medical access based on identity can be understood as a form of social control. And psychology informed my research through an experimental survey, and it helped me explore some of the psychological mechanisms that kind of perpetuate these ideas a little bit more subtly. And after conducting the initial historical and STS research, we worked on the experimental component of the project, which was a survey. So it was an online survey that had 37 questions about educational background, cultural competency experience, intergroup contact, and ethical beliefs to maybe examine how these various components play a role in the way that physicians may treat a cisgender female differently from a transgender male patient. And by including a clinical vignette in the survey, we were able to see some of the potential mechanisms for bias, as well as the beliefs that may inform them. And we distributed the survey a few different ways by combining snowball sampling and a database of physician emails, and a total of 40 responses were provided, but I really focused on the responses of 20 physicians. The analysis has been mostly quantitative, and based on what we've seen so far, there is a slight negative correlation between held ethical beliefs and attitudes towards trans individuals, indicating that people who are more strongly tethered to their ethical beliefs seem to harbor fewer negative attitudes towards trans people. But again, very small sample size, so who knows what that might look like on a bigger scale. And ultimately, this work has been a really fascinating dive into how this diagnostic process has developed as a social, medical, and political category, and how physicians may inherit and perpetuate some of the harmful beliefs held throughout history about trans people. And this is particularly relevant during a tense political and cultural climate. This year, 33 states have introduced more than 100 bills that aim to curb the rights of transgender people across the country, and approximately 1/4 of them have to do with criminalizing gender-affirming healthcare access, and most of the others restrict participation in sports and daily activities. In fact, a major donor to Stevens, Gregory Gianforte, has a few of these bills on his own desk, indicating the close proximity that educational institutions have to the responsibility to address these salient social issues. And it's been an honor to learn about social responsibility, how it intersects with education, innovation, and technology at Stevens. And thank you to Professors Ashley Lytle and Brad Fiddler for advising me on this project. It's been great.
Thank you, Eli. This is really awesome. And you're going to already have a bunch of questions in the chat waiting for you. Our final presenter is Madison Gemma. So Madison, whenever you're ready.
Yes, I will give it a go. Let's see if this works the first try. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm ready to go. So hi, everybody. Thank you. Today, I'll be going through my thesis paper, which is the CRISPR Crossroad, a cure for genetic disease or beginning of neo-eugenics. So just a little bit about me. I just want to say thank you to my advisor, Dr. Samantha, and I want to get right into the presentation. So the inspiration for my paper first began after hearing about Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier last October, because they were the first all-female team to win a Nobel Prize for chemistry. So after being interested, I looked up their work and I found it was based on CRISPR. The best way to describe CRISPR is a genetic scissor that allows researchers to specifically design a DNA template in the genome. So you can go in, target a strand, and really rewrite the code of life. So I was interested in the ethics of this. Basically, it's always equated to designer babies, but I wanted to understand the implications and considerations for the disabled community. And I did find that genetic engineering is a part of debates in that community because there is the potential to shrink it and eliminate that mutation. So in my paper, I frame CRISPR as a form of neo-eugenics. Now, I define neo-eugenics in my paper as a theoretical and clinical approach to manipulating physical and mental attributes for a desired outcome on a molecular level via gene editing. So all of that basically means that you're able to go in, edit the genome, and dictate which traits are passed on to future generations. Now, typically, our understanding of eugenics is based on the past, which is separation, segregation, and sterilization, and often coupled with ignorant discriminatory practices and genetic counseling. But today, CRISPR can be seen as a rebirth of those ideas based on genetic testing, diagnosing, and then eradication. So using the past and the history of CRISPR, of eugenics, I basically argue that CRISPR is a replication and extension of those eugenic ideas. So using 3 different case studies, deafness, dwarfism, and Down syndrome, I follow the debate and the dialogue of genetic engineering and CRISPR. So I gain words from activists, bioethicists, philosophers, scientists, and people within the community. What I found was that CRISPR is a dangerous shift against disabled communities, and it's a casual acceptance of eugenics in the 21st century. So essentially, my 3 case study chapters is an anthropological lens looking at the fear of discrimination and further segregation and inaccessibility of these communities. They are pro-choice and pro-having independent decisions when it comes to technology, but the fear rises with things like CRISPR when it's reinventing the segregation, the separation, and eradication of disabled communities. And it's doing it in a way that seems ethical and it seems harmless. So it's clear that there is eugenics rooted in medicine, and it's tipping the scales towards abortion, genetic engineering, and shrinking of these disabled communities. I just want to finish on thinking about what is the goal of genetic engineering, because people within these disabled communities are not looking for a cure with what they live with. They're looking to help them with real world issues today. So during my research, I found this quote from comedian and disability advocate Nawal Akram, which I thought was really important to consider throughout this whole project. We need solutions that are taking care of the disabled right now, medicine and access to tests and care, realistic solutions that help us now. That is truly what technology and innovation should be geared towards when it comes to the disabled community. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. And that concludes our lightning round of talks.